what's the correlation between a company trying to acquire another company, a publicly traded company trying to acquire another company, and its stock price? What would you say? Is it a negative one? Is it a positive correlation? What's the correlation? Anyone? So a publicly traded company, is trying to um, purchase or acquire another company. So suppose tomorrow Facebook says, I'm going to go and acquire this company. What if you are an investor and you say, loads of you say positive? Um, so if you're an investor, would that, assuming you're setting up a derivative trade, are you going to go for a call? So are you going to go for a buy, or are you going to put a put as a sell? What would you do? Put on the buyer. So Jamie says put on the buyer. So, and put on the buyer, call on the seller. And the answer is typically, so which basically means the correlation between the company who's acquiring and, so if you're doing an acquisition and and the company that's being sold, it's true, Shikha, you're right, it depends on who's acquiring and the company that's selling it. So is the correlation negative or positive? So you would say, all right, so you're saying neutral typically. So one mechanism, because there's no single set but bit, but if you look at historical data, the stock price of the acquiring company, the company that's acquiring, is likely to drop the minute they mention an acquisition, versus the stock price of the company that's being acquired, assuming that's a publicly traded company too, is going to go up when somebody mentions that it's going to be acquired, or the announcement comes through the pipeline that it's going to be acquired, which basically says that the acquirer to the acquired correlation would therefore be a negative correlation. One goes up. When one goes up, the other one goes down. You see the same thing. If I were to ask you, what's the correlation between price of gold and the price and the movement of DJIA, which is the Dow Jones Industrial Average? What's the correlation between price of gold and the movement of DJIA? Negative? Very good. So the answer is, and the reason why it's negative is, you start purchasing gold. Sorry, David, you can't. Let me see. Do I not have chat permissions? Sorry. Can you not read my chats at all? Adam, you can see it. Eric, Eric, David, if you can't, um, you'll see where it says main room, the left panel. There's a set of permission bits, and the third one is called chat. And perhaps that's says chat permission off. If you click on it, it should toggle it to chat permission on. So in the main room section, if it's grayed out. So have you tried clicking it? Still no. Not working. Yes, I know. Sometimes it's a bit dodgy, this setup. Yes, I'm not. Well, so what I'm going to do is, I'm sorry, guys. Oh, you can't see anybody else's comments either. Sorry. Huh, that's interesting. No luck yet. Still can't see. You can? Perfect. Let me try one more. So, true. Uh, Gold signals a weak economy in contrast to the Dow. Can anybody spot that? Huh. True. Can everybody spot that? Cool. All right. So that's your correlation, right? So anyway, so that's the basics, and we'll do more correlation when we do it hands-on in class in the next couple of weeks or so. Uh, so going back to the question, so suppose you've been given um, results from 10 years of polling customer or running market basket analysis that customers who tend to purchase beer also tend to purchase diapers. And now, armed with that information, you've been asked to come up with shelving strategies for a particular store. So, what would be your shelving strategy? So, let me open a new page and let's see if I can possibly. So, all right, so let's see. Suppose this is a store. Sorry, guys, it's absolutely horrid. All right, so, and these are the aisles. All right, so Julie says opposite, Jamie says close together. All right, anybody else? So, Jamie, would you like to specify where you'd keep, would you put them, where you'd put them? So, a few of you say together, a few of you say opposite. So, close.
I would put them closer together, but then also when having them closer together, you can have targeted um, other purchase items within there that might be impulse purchases. So you can get specifically targeted, like you know that they're going to go and get beer, and you know that they're going to go and get diapers. If you have other impulse purchases that are within that same area, you might encourage those sales.
That's a very nice point. So you might put them close together, but put an impulse purchase items right out there where people, once they're there, they might likely just pick it up. Anybody else? All right, so you can have one of those end caps. All right, better selection. Oftentimes, what you'll do, what stores typically do is, so the whole idea behind something like a store planning goes into what do you actually want customers to do when they are at a physical store? What do you want them to do? You buy items with the best margins, true, buy more, and what do they find as what's the correlation with purchasing more? So what correlates with purchasing more? What's your immediate correlation? So what's your immediate correlation with purchasing? All right, of course, that's the outcome of purchasing more revenue. But what gets people to purchase more, or what would you typically what would you tweak um, in order to get people to purchase more? Impulse exposure to product, very nice. The first piece of the puzzle is spend more time in store. So the whole state of mind, true, and the whole idea, like sort of addressing all your bits and going to what Matthew just mentioned, force them to walk more. If you ever look at a store and next time you visit a store, you'll see the type. Let me ask you, what kind of music does a store typically play? That's another perfect reason. I oftentimes like going to the one on Portage Path or whatever it is, the Giant Eagle Market District. Slow music, jazz, something, and they've found it over time. And later on, when and if you end up taking the course in operations with me, um, this was 1930s experimentation where they realized that the the beat of the music changes how long you end up spending time out there. And true, depends on market demographics. That also tells you why companies such as this market district, Giant Eagle, now allows you to actually pour yourself a pint and take that pint and walk around the store. The whole idea behind that is slow the customer down so that they're likely to spend more time in the store. The more time you spend in the store, the greater the chance of whether you're using end capping or, yeah, they even use cup holders, right? This is called Market District Giant Eagle District, if I can ever spell something right. Giant Eagle, and it's Portage Path, and they have a fantastic beer selection too. I don't know if that's the one you're mentioning, but yes, the companies are doing that all the time. So in this case, the whole idea would be they try to place things opposite ends. The whole idea is, and they try to create a path so that you're likely to branch and go and find it because they know that you're likely to. No, this isn't in Hudson. This is in, I think it's Cuyahoga Falls or Akron or something like that. I don't know. The only store out there, the Giant Eagle in Hudson doesn't have. Oh, they might actually even have it. Who knows? Possibly. The one I'm talking about is really big, and they have like a proper draft selection, with like top notch draft beers. But the whole going back to this whole issue, the idea out there is to make sure that you're traversing the entire set before you're moving in, right? That before you're contemplating on making further purchases. So these are correlations. So the answer typically is, you'll find that they'll typically place it opposite ends of the store. Now somebody mentioned demographics, and just going back to that whole idea that there's, how do you make a group that otherwise would be impatient and just want to pick something up and leave? You suddenly add things such as, what do you call it, shopping carts with a pint holder, a proper Starbucks where you can pick tea or coffee, even other food arrangements and so forth, like prepared food, so that you're spending more time. Same logic, you have the same information again, that there's a positive correlation between spending time and purchasing. Positive correlation between beer and diapers. How would you now use that same information if now Giant Eagle were to decide on going completely online? So how would the same information, the question is, it's not just the insight, it's also how you end up acting on those insights. So the physical store action that he proposes is a very interesting one. Typically you try to force people to spend more time, but here's the thing, how would you now change your actions based on if Giant Eagle were to have its store design and go completely online? So Giant Eagle now has Giant Eagle online versus Giant Eagle physical. Giant Eagle physical, you have it opposite ends. What about Giant Eagle online? How would you do your shelving there, or how would you create a customer experience there, or make people purchase things there? Anyone? Yes, Jamie, Karen?
groceries, they are still being developed right now. Like none of them are really performing as they'd like. I know Amazon's definitely jumping into that field right now.
True.
Um, it. I think that they still haven't found what is going to actually get people in there and going to spend like they would if they had to physically shop for the groceries.
And the key piece of that puzzle, and you're so very right, and the issue there lies in the fact that customers, the minute the same customer changes their channel, which is moving from physical to online, they also change their purchasing behavior and purchasing strategy. Online, you rarely want to go in search of anything. Convenience, as Adam mentioned, becomes your primary objective, which basically means you now want to reduce the number of clicks the customer ought to go through in order to find beer and diapers. It's likely you're going to say that, by the way, we have this great deal on diapers while you're at the beer section online, or when you're at the diaper section online, you might say, we've got this brilliant deal on beer. But in the process, you might also say, by the way, we also have certain deals, because what they look at, going back to what things like Amazon Recommender system does is, Amazon Recommender will try to look at common purchases between individuals, and then they'll also look at uncommon purchases between individuals. For example, exactly as Julie mentioned, so let's assume Julie and Adam purchase the same book on Amazon, but they also purchase something else. Adam and Karen purchase the same book or the same other item on Amazon that Julie hasn't purchased, but they also purchase something else. So what they'll do is they'll take out the common set between those two, and they'll push in what Julie purchased as the other bit to Adam and Karen, and what Adam and Karen purchase as the other bit onto Julie. So the idea is trying to get them excited about what people that purchase this also tend to purchase as a mechanism to bundle. Just the way companies try to now trace if customers were to move from this section to the other section, what's likely to be the flow of the customer, and what ought to be the things we should place on the aisles that they're likely to cover in order to reach from point A to point B. So you're always trying to map out flow as a part of your analytical strategy. So going back to so your market basket analysis is not just looking at association rules and correlation mechanisms, but it's also looking at what do you do now that you know the correlation. The other important thing to remember about correlation is not causation. Correlation only tells you what things happen together. Doesn't automatically mean that because you do this, you will do something else. If you can know that, once you can figure out that because somebody purchases that, then they will purchase this, there's an order to it. So correlation doesn't have an order associated with it. In correlation, it says two things happen. Does one trigger the purchase of the other? Does the other trigger the purchase of one? We don't know. However, if you can find out the trigger, you now know what is going to be the right scent that's going to drive somebody to come to the store anyway. So for example, assume you knew that beer is what brings people to the store, and only when they purchase beer do they purchase diapers. If they don't purchase beer, they're not going to purchase diapers. Then you know that, all right, all I need to know, if I know that beer is actually the cause for the purchase of diapers, I'm now going to subtly entice people to come in with a special beer deal or whatever it is, because we know that they can come in with this great beer deal, but then we are going to increase the margin on diaper sales because we know that that is their gateway drug. So the beer is the gateway drug. Once they come in to purchase that, they're likely to purchase the next bit, and we can now increase our margin on the next piece of the puzzle. And that becomes a key ingredient. And as we move from in the next few weeks, as we move from understanding things like correlation to understanding causation, what causes what, we will start getting more and more into prediction models where we'll start thinking of what causes certain things. Everybody all right in terms of what we're talking about? Does that make sense? Is that utterly useless, stupid, rubbish, boring? None of the above, hopefully. Any questions, guys? No? All right. Fair enough. Thank you very much. So let's go into something called churn analysis. Thank you very much. Let's go into churn analysis. So churn analysis, when you talk about churn is a huge issue, which basically asks you, why isn't it that all our browsers are converted into buyers? So as we speak, especially at a retail level, even at a wholesale inter-organizational B2B exchange level, there's always this thing that, why is it that people ask for information but never made a purchase? Why is it that people clicked on all these products and sometimes even added them onto a shopping cart, but never actually checked out those pieces? That kind of analysis is called a churn analysis, where they try to look at predictive modeling in terms of what are the probabilities and the reasons for customer attrition, which is discontinuing and not repeating purchases. So customer churn is a measure of customer retention, given that the cost of retaining a customer is considerably lower than attracting a new customer. And churn rate is calculated as percentage of repeat customers per period. Churn analysis, by the way, churn rate is also calculated in terms of the amount of missing customers from browsing to buying, from browsing to carting, from carting to purchasing. Because this can now tell you about customer traits, segments. Is it because they couldn't find information? Did they spend a lot of time on a page? Did they look at competing products and services? Did information about competing products and services increase confusion, because of which they couldn't really make up their mind? And that's why companies will oftentimes especially create single threads. While you're on a session, right, or while they call it a session every time you're visiting a page, they try and look at the time you're spending on a certain page, on a certain product. And internally there's an algorithm that says that if the percentage is spending more than whatever it is, 2 minutes on this particular page and still haven't added something to a cart, or hasn't added something to a cart, possibly pop up a message saying that, would you like some help with the purchase, or do you have some questions about the item? This all come from things like churn analysis, because they try and predict customer behavior, and they realize that if somebody is spending more than 30 seconds, the chance or the probability that they're going to make a purchase increases. However, if the time that they're spending on the page is more than 3 minutes possibly, the probability of making a purchase decreases. So little time spent is good, too much time spent is bad. And they know that this is oftentimes a trigger, where too much time spent on a page is automatically a sign that not all is quiet on the Western Front, and possibly that you need some kind of an intervention. And the system itself will intervene and say that, do you want some help with it? And if you say yes, guess what? A chat session is going to open up, or something similar will happen where they'll try to solve the issue altogether. Make sense, guys? Does that make sense? Good. Thank you very much. So the next one is something called break-even analysis and contribution margin. So let's talk a little bit, because this is a very, very important piece of analytics, and very important for everyone to know, even as you're solving different things. True, and you'll always see that companies like AT&T will always try to upsell you something, because anytime you're there, the idea is, if you're visiting, if you're ever sort of browsing, it's likely that you might be interested. If you're interested, perhaps they should ask you if they could offer you a certain service or a certain product, or come up with an interesting discounting for you based on how long you've been a customer and all that stuff, to solve the issue, which is basically all they want to do is reduce churn. So yes, but see, that also can, to a certain degree, change your entire. This is called, when Jamie mentions that you might want to move from AT&T to Verizon, this is called a switching behavior. And that again is that very thin line customers have to, or companies have to tread or traverse, because a little bit of attention is good. If you suddenly feel like too much attention is being tantamount to smothering, it's likely that they're going to be empty nesters very soon. And it's important for companies to figure out exactly what defines providing some attention, and at what point of time does attention turn into smothering behavior. So going back to this bit, break-even analysis, contribution margin, two very important piece of the puzzle. Anybody knows what contribution margin is? So two very important pieces to know. One is, of course, thank you very much, gross margin and contribution margin. So what's gross margin? So gross margin is sales revenue minus cost of sales, right? So nowadays they call it cost of sales rather than cost of goods sold. The previous bit used to be called cost of goods sold. Nowadays they call it cost of sales, because it could be sales of a service, but there isn't really a cost of goods sold for a service. So, but there's a cost of service. So gross margin is that. So the margin, it's called a margin because it's a ratio. And a ratio, therefore, a margin, therefore, would be your gross sales. So it would be gross profit divided by revenue, which would therefore be your gross margin. A margin always by default, do remember this, and I know most of you know that already. We covered it last class, good. And contribution margin is cost minus, revenue minus, so I'll just do a quick recap. Revenue minus variable costs. Now, could you remind me if we covered break-even calculations? Did we cover break-even? No? Yes? Oh, we did cover break-even, right? And if I were to ask you, you did it in your last accounting class. All right, fantastic. So let's do if I were to give you something in terms of a quick break-even point, so suppose I just I'll do a quick take, because this is I think it's a very, very important metric anyway in the process, but you'd be able to tackle it, right? Perfect. So quick bit is, break-even point is, you typically calculate it as fixed costs divided by contribution margin. That's your basic calculation. And everybody knows how to get it. I'm not going to do an exercise or anything like that, just a very basic coverage, because again, these are important things and sometimes a little bit of recap is good. So break even, basically you're asking how many units or how many services should I sell in order for me to start making money. So your basic setup is revenue per unit of good or service, right, times the number of goods or services is equal to nothing but fixed costs of producing those goods and services plus variable costs per unit times number of units. Right, guys? That's your general structure. Which basically means if you want to, sorry, this is right, fair enough. So in this case, all you're doing is revenues times number of units minus, so you're bringing the variable costs over, VC times number of units is equal to fixed costs. Everybody clear till this point? All I did was move this bit to the left, which basically means if you take number of units, you factor that out, number of units, you have revenues minus variable costs, which is equal to fixed costs, which means if you're solving for number of units, it's basically fixed costs divided by revenues minus variable costs, right? I should put in brackets because they're together. And we know that revenue minus variable costs is equal to, because revenue minus variable costs is equal to contribution margin. Your BEP is nothing but fixed costs divided by contribution margin. Everybody clear on that part? Lovely. Thank you very much, guys. And if you have any questions, the idea is to build synergy across different courses so that, it starts making sense as you're preparing that, right? Or trying to figure these things out. So going back onto it, so in this case, all you need to therefore know is what would be the fixed costs and what exactly would be the variable costs. But going back into this whole mechanism, it's also important for you to subtly start making sense out of these break-even points. That why is it that restaurants and bars are typically, and taverns and so forth, are typically the ones that pop up like mushroom and also disappear very, very, very quickly? And the response is because most of them never ever figure out what their break-even point setups are. You'll see that there are the companies that typically go under the quickest, the restaurants, are the ones that have these very colorful menus spanning many, many pages, which also sends you a signal that these are companies that are also carrying a lot of inventory without really knowing what's the demand for the inventory that you're carrying in the process. More inventory increases fixed costs. More inventory also increases variable costs, because every time a customer once in a while asks for a certain thing, you now have to do a full preparation and a full set. Therefore, your break-even point at which you're actually breaking even suddenly goes up dramatically, and it becomes very difficult to fulfill it. While the restaurants that really do well will typically are typically more upscale, will have a very small menu, have a much more boutique feel to it, whether it's a Michelin star where you don't even decide what you want. You're supposed to be coming in for hot cuisine that is defined by the chef, who will tell you exactly what you will get as a series of culinary delights of sorts. And you'll also see places, whether you're going to Lola's or Dante's or even downtown 140 in Hudson, it's a one-page menu, which means keep your fixed costs low, keep your inventory low, keep your variable costs low. By virtue of that, your break-even point automatically is going to be pressed lower in the process.